The recruitment officer's mandibles clicked in what humans had learned to recognize as amusement. Commander Zexhai of the Galactic Defense Coalition looked down at the datapad displaying the latest batch of human recruits, his 4 eyes scanning the information with practiced efficiency. Another batch of primitives, he muttered to his aide, a thin Catherian whose scales shifted color with anxiety. Look at this one. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, 23 standard years old. Graduated from some backwater academy on Earth. No real combat experience beyond training simulations. The aide's scales flickered pale yellow. Sir, the humans have proven surprisingly adaptable in recent conflicts. Perhaps we shouldn't. Adaptable. Zexhai's mandibles clacked sharply. They've been in space for barely 2 centuries. My species was exploring the galaxy when theirs was still throwing rocks at each other. Mark my words, Veltar, these rookies will need constant supervision. 3 sectors away, aboard the Coalition battleship Stellar Apex, Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood at attention in the cramped briefing room. Around her, seasoned warriors from a dozen different species reviewed tactical displays with the casual confidence of veterans. The Krexani soldiers towered over everyone at nearly 3 meters tall, their exoskeletons gleaming under the harsh lights. The Voltharian pilots whispered among themselves in their musical language, their bioluminescent markings pulsing in complex patterns. Sarah felt every bit the rookie they believed her to be. Her standard-issue Coalition uniform was crisp and new, lacking the scars and modifications that marked a veteran's gear. Her weapon had never been fired in anger. Her armor had never deflected enemy plasma. By every metric that mattered to these beings, she was exactly what they labeled her. An inexperienced human thrust into conflicts beyond her understanding. Captain Mordeth, a grizzled Thraxian with cybernetic implants covering half his face, activated the holographic display. The 3-dimensional map showed the Kepler 442 system, where a Coalition mining operation had gone silent 3 days ago. Intelligence suggests void hunters, Mordeth growled, his translator implant rendering his words in crisp standard. The same raiders who've been hitting Outer Rim facilities for the past year. Fast, brutal, and they don't take prisoners. A murmur went through the assembled troops. The void hunters were known throughout the galaxy, a loose confederation of savage species from beyond the galactic rim. They appeared without warning, struck with overwhelming force and vanished back into the cosmic dark. No one had ever successfully tracked them to their origin point. The mining facility housed 3,000 workers, Mordeth continued, mostly civilians. Our job is simple: secure the facility, eliminate any remaining threats, and gather intelligence on void hunter capabilities. Sarah raised her hand. The gesture felt awkward among species that communicated readiness through pheromone releases, color changes, or electromagnetic pulses. Every eye in the room turned to her, and she felt the weight of their judgment. Sir, what's our extraction protocol if we encounter superior numbers? A few of the veterans exchanged glances. Sergeant Kralex, a 4-armed pentarch, let out what passed for a chuckle among his kind. Typical human question, he said, not bothering to lower his voice. Always thinking about retreat before the battle begins. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she maintained her professional composure. I prefer to think of it as tactical flexibility, Sergeant. There is no retreat, Mordeth stated flatly. The facility sits on a strategic hyperspace junction. If the Void Hunters establish a permanent base there, they'll have access to 12 different sectors. We hold that position or we die trying. The briefing continued for another hour, covering everything from atmospheric conditions to enemy weapon signatures. Sarah took careful notes, her tablet filling with tactical observations and contingency plans. She noticed patterns in the Void Hunter attack data that others seemed to miss, subtle timing discrepancies that suggested coordination beyond simple raiding. As the troops filed out to prepare for deployment, Sarah found herself walking beside Specialist Quindar, a young Zephyrian whose crystalline skin refracted the corridor lights into prismatic patterns. Unlike the others, Quindar didn't seem to judge her for her inexperience. First deployment? Quindar asked, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones characteristic of his species. With the Coalition, yes, Sarah replied, though I saw action during the Martian independence conflict. Quindar's crystalline features shifted in what might have been surprise. You fought against other humans? Civil war has a way of teaching hard lessons quickly, Sarah said quietly. Sometimes the enemy you know is more dangerous than the one you don't. In her quarters, Sarah methodically checked her equipment. Her rifle was a standard coalition plasma weapon, reliable but unremarkable. Her armor was basic protection gear, designed more for environmental hazards than sustained combat. By galactic standards, her loadout marked her as expendable, a rookie expected to follow orders and hopefully survive long enough to learn something useful. But Sarah carried equipment that wasn't listed on any manifest. A small device that looked like a standard communicator, but was actually a sophisticated sensor array, built using principles her instructors at the Mars Colonial Defense Academy had developed through bitter experience. Humans might be new to galactic warfare, but they'd been perfecting the art of killing each other for millennia. She also carried something else, knowledge that the Coalition's alien members couldn't comprehend. Humans had learned to fight not just with superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but with cunning, adaptability, and a willingness to do whatever survival demanded. They'd learned these lessons in the mud of ancient battlefields, in the vacuum of space around Luna, and in the poisoned atmosphere of Mars. The ship's intercom crackled to life. All personnel, prepare for hyperspace translation to Kepler 442, estimated arrival in 6 hours. Sarah sealed her gear and lay back on the narrow bunk. Around her, the ship hummed with the conversations of veteran warriors sharing old stories and preparing for another routine operation. They saw her as a liability, a rookie who would need protection and guidance. They had no idea that humanity's greatest military minds had been analyzing Void Hunter tactics for months, developing countermeasures based on principles these aliens had never encountered. They didn't know that every human recruit carried, more than weapons, they carried the accumulated, tactical knowledge of a species that had never known peace. Sarah closed her eyes and reviewed the battle plans one more time. In a few hours, she would either validate their assumptions about human inexperience, or she would show them why Earth's military academies produce soldiers that fought with a creativity and viciousness that the galaxy had never seen. The Void Hunters were about to learn what the veterans aboard this ship would soon discover, that labeling. Someone, a rookie, said more about the observer than the observed. The Kepler 442 mining facility hung in space like a broken spine. What had once been a gleaming testament to galactic cooperation now showed the savage artistry of Void Hunter destruction. Massive sections had been torn away, their metal framework twisted into impossible angles that defied conventional weapon signatures. Captain Mordeth stood on the bridge of the stellar apex, his cybernetic eye whirring as it analyzed the damage patterns. Preliminary scans show no life signs, he announced to the assembled squad leaders. But thermal imaging indicates recent activity in sectors 7 through 12. Sarah stood with the other junior officers, watching the tactical display update in real time. While the veterans focused on obvious signs of battle damage, she noticed something else. The pattern of destruction was too random, too chaotic. Her experience with human insurgency tactics had taught her to look beyond the obvious. "Sir," she said, addressing Mordeth directly, "the damage pattern suggests the facility wasn't just attacked. It was camouflaged." Sergeant Kralex's forearms gestured dismissively. "Camouflaged? It's a wreck, human. There's nothing subtle about Void Hunter tactics." Sarah stepped forward, highlighting sections of the facility on her portable display. "Look at the thermal signatures in the undamaged sections. They're too uniform, too cold. If the facility was completely abandoned, we'd see more variants from residual life support systems shutting down at different rates." Commander HFY, who had joined the assault force at the last minute, studied the data with obvious skepticism. "You're suggesting the Void Hunters are capable of sophisticated deception? They're raiders, not tactical geniuses." "With respect, sir, that assumption might be why they've been so successful," Sarah replied. "On Mars, we learned that the enemy's greatest weapon isn't always their technology. It's our preconceptions about their capabilities." The tension in the briefing room was palpable. Several alien officers exchanged glances that clearly communicated their opinion of the presumptuous human rookie, but Captain Mordeth studied the tactical display with renewed interest. "Explain your theory, Lieutenant," he said finally. Sarah manipulated the holographic display, overlaying attack vectors and damage patterns. The destruction follows specific corridors, all leading away from the central mining shaft. But notice these secondary explosions here, and here. They're designed to look like cascade failures, but the timing is wrong. They're deliberate diversions. She highlighted a section of the facility that appeared heavily damaged, This area shows plasma scoring consistent with Void Hunter weapons, but the structural damage is minimal. It's theatrical, meant to draw attention away from the fact that the primary mining equipment is completely intact. Specialist? Quindar's crystalline features shifted to a deep blue, excitement among his species. You think they're still there, using the facility as a base. More than that, Sarah said. I think they're mining. The Kepler 442 system doesn't just have strategic value for its hyperspace junction. It has quantronium deposits, the most valuable mineral in the galaxy. Commander HFY's mandibles clicked rapidly. Impossible. Void Hunters lack the technical sophistication for large-scale mining operations. Do they? Sarah pulled up intelligence reports on her tablet. Every raid they've conducted has targeted facilities with specific resources. They're not random pirates, they're suppliers. Someone is directing them. Someone who needs massive quantities of rare minerals. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If Sarah was right, the Void Hunters weren't just raiders. They were the military arm of a larger organization. Someone with the resources to coordinate attacks across multiple sectors. Someone who understood galactic economics well enough to target the most valuable facilities. Mordeth made his decision. We proceed with the original plan, but with modifications. Lieutenant Chen, you'll accompany the reconnaissance team. If your theory is correct, we need intelligence more than a direct assault. The transport bay of the Stellar Apex buzzed with pre-mission activity. Coalition troops performed final equipment checks while the ship's automated systems loaded combat drones and heavy weapons. Sarah found herself assigned to Alpha Squad, led by Sergeant Kralex and comprised mostly of veteran Krixani warriors. As she sealed her helmet and checked her weapon systems, Sarah overheard Kralex speaking to his troops in their native language. Her translator picked up fragments. Babysitting duty. Keep the human alive. Probably get us all killed with her theories. She didn't respond. In a few hours, her competence would speak louder than any words. The shuttle ride to the mining facility was tense and quiet. Through the viewport, Sarah watched the massive structure grow larger, its twisted metal framework casting complex shadows in the light of the system's binary stars. Her enhanced sensor array, disguised as a standard comm unit, picked up energy signatures that the shuttle's basic scanners missed. 2 clicks to Docking Bay 7, announced the pilot. Sensors show the bay is intact and pressurized. Sarah frowned at her readings. Sergeant, I'm picking up electromagnetic interference consistent with active jamming equipment. Someone is definitely trying to hide something. Kralex checked his own instruments, then grunted in what might have been acknowledgement. All squads maintain radio silence once we're aboard. Standard search and clear protocol. The docking bay was a scene of carefully orchestrated destruction. Cargo containers were scattered across the deck plating, their contents spilled in patterns that looked random but felt wrong to Sarah's trained eye. Emergency lighting cast everything in a hellish red glow, and the air recyclers hummed with an odd harmonic that made her teeth ache. Alpha Squad moved through the facility like a pack of predators, their movements precise and coordinated. The Krixani were impressive soldiers. Their natural armor provided protection equivalent to military-grade environmental suits, and their forearms allowed them to carry heavier weapons while maintaining tactical flexibility. But Sarah noticed things they missed. Scuff marks on the deck plates that were too fresh for a facility that had been abandoned for 3 days. Tool marks on supposedly blast-damaged bulkheads that showed recent cutting activity. Most tellingly, the facility's artificial gravity was running at exactly 85% of galactic standard, the optimal setting for heavy mining equipment, operation. They were 3 levels into the facility when Sarah's sensors detected the first definitive proof of her theory. Through the bulkhead, her equipment picked up the distinctive resonance signature of operating quantronium extractors. The Void Hunters weren't just hiding in the facility, they were strip mining it with industrial efficiency. She was about to alert Sergeant Kralex when her sensors detected something else, movement signatures converging on their position from multiple directions. The Void Hunters had been tracking their progress since the moment they docked. Alpha Squad was walking into a carefully prepared ambush, and they had no idea that their rookie human had just become their only chance of survival. Sarah's tactical display showed a nightmare scenario. Red dots representing hostile contacts were moving through the facility's ventilation systems, service corridors, and maintenance shafts, routes that the Coalition's standard reconnaissance protocols didn't monitor. The Void Hunters had turned the mining facility into a three-dimensional killing field. "Sergeant," she whispered into her comm, "we need to—" The first plasma bolt cut through the air where Kralex's head had been a moment before. The Krexani warrior's reflexes saved his life, but his surprised grunt told Sarah everything she needed to know about how unprepared they were for this level of tactical sophistication. "Contact!" Kralex roared, bringing his heavy plasma cannon to bear. "All units, defensive positions." The Alpha Squad moved with practiced efficiency, taking cover behind cargo containers and structural supports. But Sarah could see the fatal flaw in their positioning. They were thinking in 2 dimensions while their enemies owned 3. Her sensor array showed Void Hunter forces moving through the deck plating above and below them, preparing to turn their defensive position into a tomb. "We're in a kill box," Sarah said, grabbing Kralex's armored shoulder. "They've got vertical positioning on us. We need to move now." "Negative," the sergeant replied, cycling through targeting modes on his weapon. "Standard protocol is to establish a defensive perimeter and call for support." Sarah watched her sensors as more red dots converged on their position. In 30 seconds, the Void Hunters would have them surrounded on 3 levels. "Standard protocol is going to get us all killed." She didn't wait for permission. Sarah pulled a device from her utility belt, something that looked like a standard emergency beacon but was actually a piece of human military innovation that the Coalition had never seen. She primed it with a complex sequence that would have been impossible for most species to input, with only 2 hands. The device emitted a subsonic pulse that interfered with the facility's artificial gravity generators. For 10 seconds, gravity fluctuated wildly throughout their section, a phenomenon that would be impossible to predict or compensate for unless you knew exactly what was coming. Sarah used those 10 seconds to demonstrate why human soldiers were trained in zero-gravity combat from their first day of basic training. While the Krexani struggled to maintain their footing and the attacking Void Hunters were thrown off balance, she moved through the shifting gravity field like a dancer. Her rifle spoke 3 times in rapid succession. 3 plasma bolts found their targets with surgical precision, Void Hunters who had been preparing to drop through ceiling vents directly into Alpha Squad's defensive position. The enemies fell. Like broken dolls, their ambush ruined by a tactic none of them had ever encountered. Gravity stabilized and Sarah was already moving to a new position when Sergeant Kralex's stunned voice crackled over the comm. "How did you—" "What was that device?" "Human ingenuity," Sarah replied tersely, checking her sensor readings. "And we've got about 20 seconds before the next wave hits. We need to reach the central mining shaft." "The central shaft is 2 kilometers from here through hostile territory," Kralex protested. "We should fall back to the shuttle and call for reinforcements." Sarah highlighted the tactical situation on her display. "The shuttle bay is already compromised. They've got forces moving to cut off our retreat. Our only chance is to reach the mining equipment and use it to even the odds." Specialist Quindar's voice joined the conversation, his crystalline form taking cover behind a damaged atmospheric processor. "What kind of mining equipment could help us against superior numbers?" Sarah smiled grimly inside her helmet. "The kind that can collapse sections of this facility with surgical precision. Follow me, and stay low." What followed was a running battle through corridors that had become a deadly maze. The Void Hunters were unlike any enemy the Coalition forces had faced. They moved with liquid grace through familiar territory, using the facility's own systems against the intruders. Emergency lighting flickered on and off in patterns that coordinated their attacks, while atmospheric controls created pockets of dense fog that concealed their movements. But Sarah had advantages they couldn't anticipate. Her sensor array penetrated their concealment tactics, revealing positions and movement patterns that her Coalition teammates couldn't detect. More importantly, her training had prepared her for exactly this type of asymmetric warfare. During the battle for New Shanghai on Mars, human forces had perfected the art of urban combat against technologically superior enemies. They'd learned to turn infrastructure into weapons, to use an enemy's advantages against them, and to think beyond conventional tactical doctrine. As Alpha Squad moved through the facility, Sarah began implementing strategies that the aliens found incomprehensible. She used the mining facility's own automated systems against their attackers, triggering maintenance cycles that flooded corridors with superheated steam. She accessed cargo handling equipment to create mobile barriers and improvised weapons. Most effectively, she began predicting Void Hunter movements by analyzing the facility's power consumption patterns. The human is using their own systems against them, Quindar observed with something like awe as Sarah triggered a series of bulkhead closures that trapped a squad of Void Hunters in a service corridor. Impossible, Kralex muttered. She's been here for less than an hour. How can she understand these systems better than enemies who've had 3 days to study them? Sarah paused at an intersection, checking her sensors before motioning the squad forward. Because I'm not trying to understand their systems, Sergeant. I'm understanding their psychology. Every species has patterns, preferred tactics, comfort zones. The Void Hunters are good, but they're still thinking like raiders. They're using this facility like captured territory instead of treating it like home. She gestured to subtle signs that the others had missed. Power routing that prioritized mining operations over defensive systems, equipment placement that optimized for extraction efficiency rather than tactical advantage, defensive positions that protected valuable machinery rather than strategic choke points. They're not just mining quantronium, Sarah continued. They're doing it on a schedule. Someone is expecting regular deliveries, which means they can't afford to damage the extraction equipment. That's their weakness. As they approached the central mining shaft, the scale of the Void Hunter operation became clear. The massive chamber stretched for kilometers in every direction, filled with industrial equipment that hummed with purposeful activity. Automated extractors worked at maximum efficiency, while sophisticated sorting systems processed raw quantronium into refined crystals worth more than some planets' entire economies. But what caught Sarah's attention wasn't the mining equipment. It was the ships. 3 Void Hunter vessels were docked at loading bays, their cargo holds being filled with processed quantronium. These weren't the fast raiders the Coalition intelligence described. They were heavy haulers designed for long-range transport. My God, Quindar whispered. This isn't a raid, it's an industrial operation. Sarah studied the ships through her scope, noting details that would revolutionize Coalition understanding of Void Hunter capabilities. And we just crashed their shipping schedule. They're not going to let us leave with this intelligence. As if summoned by her words, the facility's intercom system crackled to life. A voice spoke in accented standard, the words carrying undertones of authority and barely controlled rage. Coalition forces, you have seen too much. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Sarah checked her weapons charge and smiled coldly. Counteroffer. You can surrender to us, and we'll make sure you live long enough to answer some questions. The response was immediate. Every Void Hunter in the facility began converging on the central shaft. Sarah's sensors showed dozens of contacts moving with deadly purpose toward their position. The rookie they'd dismissed was about to show them exactly what a human soldier could accomplish when survival was the only option. The central mining shaft had become a coliseum of metal and stone, with Alpha Squad trapped at its heart, while Void Hunter forces converged from every direction. Sarah's tactical display showed a hopeless situation. 43 hostiles moving through the facility's superstructure like antibodies, responding to an infection. Sergeant Kralex positioned his squad with professional competence, but Sarah could see the defeat in his body language. The Krexani warrior had fought in dozens of campaigns, and he recognized a death trap when he saw one. Lieutenant, he said quietly, if you have any more of those human tricks, now would be the time. Sarah studied the mining operation with calculating eyes. The quantronium extractors were sophisticated pieces of technology, but they operated on principles that any engineer would recognize. More importantly, they were connected to the facility's power grid in ways that could be exploited by someone who understood industrial sabotage. I need 5 minutes and complete access to that control station, she said, pointing to a raised platform overlooking the mining operation. 5 minutes? Quindar's crystalline features shifted to deep purple, alarm among his species. The Void Hunters will be in optimal firing position in 3 minutes. Sarah was already moving, her magnetic boots clanking against the metal walkway as she sprinted toward the control station. Then you'll have to buy me the extra time, What followed was a masterclass in desperate tactics. The Coalition soldiers used every piece of cover, every structural advantage they could find to slow the Void Hunter advance. Kralex's heavy plasma cannon filled the air with superheated death, while Quindar's precision rifle picked off enemies who tried to flank their position. But Sarah was fighting a different battle entirely. Her fingers flew across the mining facility's control interface, accessing systems that had been locked down since the initial attack. The Void Hunters had taken control of the facility's obvious functions: lighting, life support, security systems. But they'd overlooked the industrial equipment, dismissing it as irrelevant to combat operations. That oversight was about to cost them everything. Sarah accessed the quantronium refining process and began making subtle adjustments to the extraction parameters. Quantronium was valuable precisely because it was unstable. A single crystal could power a starship for months, but mishandling it could result in explosions that made nuclear weapons look like firecrackers. "What are you doing?" Kralex demanded, pausing his fire to glance at her workstation. "Turning their mining operation into the galaxy's most expensive bomb," Sarah replied, her voice tight with concentration. "The extraction process uses containment fields to stabilize the quantronium during processing. If I can create a resonance cascade in the containment matrix..." She didn't need to finish the explanation. Every Coalition soldier understood the implications. A quantronium explosion in an enclosed space would vaporize everything within a 50-kilometer radius. "That's suicide," Quindar protested. "We'll never reach minimum safe distance in time." Sarah's smile was visible through her helmet's faceplate. "Not if we use their ships." She highlighted the 3 Void Hunter vessels on her tactical display, heavy haulers built for long-range transport. They'll have military-grade shielding and emergency jump drives. If we can reach one of those ships before the cascade reaction reaches critical mass..." "You're insane," Kralex said, but there was something like admiration in his voice. "How long do we have?" Sarah's fingers continued their deadly work on the control interface. "From the moment I initiate the cascade, 7 minutes before total facility destruction, but we'll have maybe 4 minutes before the radiation becomes lethal." The Void Hunters had reached optimal attack positions. Plasma fire began raining down on Alpha Squad's position from 3 different levels, forcing the Coalition soldiers to take cover behind increasingly inadequate barriers. Sarah could hear the whine of energy weapons overheating and the distinctive crack of armor taking direct hits. "Do it," Kralex ordered. "Whatever you're planning, do it now." Sarah entered the final command sequence and watched as the mining facility's most sophisticated safety systems began shutting down one by one. Deep in the planet's crust, quantronium extraction points that had operated safely for decades suddenly found their containment fields operating outside acceptable parameters. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Emergency alarms began wailing throughout the facility as automated systems detected the growing instability. The Void Hunter attack faltered as soldiers who had been focused on killing Coalition forces suddenly realized that the entire facility was becoming a death trap. "Attention all forces," Sarah broadcast on all frequencies, her voice carrying the authority of someone who held everyone's lives in her hands. "You have approximately 6 minutes to evacuate this facility before a quantronium cascade destroys everything within 50 kilometers. I suggest you start running." The response was chaos. Void Hunter forces abandoned their attack to flee toward their ships, while Coalition soldiers struggled to understand what their rookie teammate had just accomplished. Sarah was already moving, leading Alpha Squad toward the nearest docked hauler with the confident stride of someone who had just turned a hopeless battle into a winnable scenario. The Void Hunter ship was a massive vessel designed for cargo capacity rather than maneuverability. Its loading bay was still open, automated systems continuing to load refined quantronium even as the facility began tearing itself apart around them. Sarah reached the ship's boarding ramp just as the first Void Hunter crew members arrived from the opposite direction. The meeting was brief and violent. Void Hunters were formidable opponents, tall, chitinous beings with natural armor and weapons that could punch through standard Coalition equipment. But they were also panicked, more concerned with escaping the growing catastrophe than with fighting a handful of Coalition soldiers. Sarah's rifle spoke with deadly precision, dropping 2 Void Hunters before they could bring their weapons to bear. Kralex's heavy cannon vaporized a third, while Quindar's specialized ammunition found gaps in chitinous armor with surgical accuracy. "Ship secure," Sarah announced, sealing the boarding ramp behind them. Now we need to get this thing started before... The facility shuddered around them as the first quantronium extraction point lost containment. The explosion was felt rather than heard, a deep, bone-shaking tremor that spoke of forces beyond normal comprehension. Emergency lighting failed throughout the facility, leaving only the hellish glow of unstable energy reactions. Sarah reached the ship's bridge and began familiarizing herself with Void Hunter technology. The control systems were alien but logical, designed for efficiency rather than complexity. More importantly, the ship's computer systems contained navigation data, communication logs, and operational records that would revolutionize Coalition understanding of Void Hunter capabilities. "Can you fly this thing?" Krellex asked, watching readouts that none of them could fully understand. "I can fly anything that follows basic physics," Sarah replied, her hands dancing across unfamiliar controls. "But we've got a bigger problem. This ship's jump drive needs 3 minutes to charge, and we've got maybe 2 minutes before the cascade reaction reaches critical mass." Through the ship's viewports, they could see the mining facility beginning to tear itself apart. Massive structural elements were buckling under the stress of uncontrolled energy releases. While emergency pods launched from various sections carrying Void Hunter personnel fleeing the disaster, one of those pods was moving toward their ship with obvious hostile intent. "Incoming," Quindar announced, his crystalline features shifting to combat patterns. "Looks like some of the Void Hunters decided we're a bigger threat than the explosion." Sarah studied the tactical situation with the cold calculation of a veteran. The approaching pod carried enough firepower to damage their ship's jump drive, but it was also flying directly through the expanding field of unstable quantronium. "Radiation, let them come," she said quietly. "They're about to learn why humans don't believe in impossible odds." The Void Hunter assault pod approached through space filled with deadly radiation, its pilot either incredibly brave or completely desperate. Sarah watched its trajectory on the stolen ship's sensors, calculating intercept times and weapon ranges with the cold precision of someone who had learned mathematics in the crucible of actual combat. "Jump drive at 60% charge," Krellex reported, his forearms working the unfamiliar controls with surprising dexterity. "Whatever you're planning, human, make it fast." Sarah's hands moved across the ship's weapon systems, familiarizing herself with Void Hunter technology through necessity and intuition. The control interfaces were different from Coalition standards, but the underlying principles remained the same. Aim at target, press trigger, hope for the best. "Quindar, I need you to monitor the facility's power grid," she ordered. "When the next extraction point loses containment, we'll have approximately 40 seconds of electromagnetic interference. That's our window." The crystalline being's features shifted to confused orange. "Window for what?" "For something the Void Hunters will never expect," Sarah replied, bringing the ship's defensive systems online. "A human pilot who learned to fly in the asteroid belts around Mars." The approaching assault pod opened fire at maximum range, its plasma cannons painting lines of superheated death across the space where their ship had been moments before. But Sarah had already begun moving, using the stolen hauler's surprising maneuverability to dance between the incoming fire. Void Hunter ships were built for efficiency, not dogfighting, but Sarah had learned to fly in environments where a single mistake meant death by vacuum exposure. The asteroid belts around Mars had taught her that any vehicle could be a weapon if you understood physics and had enough desperation. "Incoming missiles," Quindar announced, his voice tight with stress. 4 plasma torpedoes locked onto our engine signatures." Sarah smiled grimly and began implementing a tactic that would have been impossible for any pilot trained in conventional space combat doctrine. Instead of trying to outrun the missiles, she flew directly toward the mining facility's superstructure, using the massive industrial equipment as cover. The stolen hauler screamed through spaces barely wide enough for its hull, Sarah's piloting pushing the ship beyond its design limitations. Behind them, the pursuing missiles tried to maintain lock while navigating the complex maze of mining equipment and structural supports. 2 of the missiles impacted against quantronium processing units, their explosions adding to the growing cascade reaction. The other 2 lost target lock when Sarah used the facility's own sensor arrays to create false signatures. "Impossible," Krellex muttered, watching the tactical display as their pursuer tried desperately to reacquire them. "No pilot could navigate this chaos." No alien pilot, Sarah corrected, bringing the ship around in a maneuver that violated several laws of physics and common sense. But human pilots are trained to fly in three-dimensional environments from childhood. We learn to think in vectors and relative motion before we learn to walk. The second quantronium extraction point lost containment, sending a pulse of electromagnetic energy through the facility that temporarily disabled all electronic systems. For 40 seconds, every ship, sensor, and communication device in the area went dark. Sarah had been counting on that interference. During the blackout, she used momentum and manual controls to position their ship directly behind the Void Hunter assault pod. When systems came back online, the enemy pilot found himself staring down the barrel of a heavy hauler's cargo manipulation arm. The mechanical appendage, designed for loading quantronium containers, made an excellent improvised weapon. Sarah activated the arm's grabbing mechanism and watched as it closed around the assault pod's engine section with the irresistible force of industrial machinery. "What are you doing?" The enemy pilot's voice crackled over the communication system, his words translated by the ship's computer into accented standard. "Learning," Sarah replied, using the cargo arm to position the captured pod as a shield between their ship and the facility's growing instability. "Your people have been attacking coalition facilities for months. Now it's time to find out who's been giving you your orders." The facility shuddered around them as the cascade reaction reached critical mass. Through the viewports, they could see massive structural elements beginning to buckle and collapse. Emergency pods continued launching from various sections, but many were already too late. The expanding field of unstable quantronium energy was vaporizing anything that couldn't reach minimum safe distance. "Jump drive at 90%, Kralex announced. "But we've got another problem. The electromagnetic interference is disrupting our navigation computer. We could jump anywhere in the galaxy." Sarah studied the captured Void Hunter pilot through the cargo bay's video feed. The enemy was a tall, chitinous being with compound eyes that reflected fear and calculation in equal measure. More importantly, his ship's computer systems were still linked to the hauler's network. "Not anywhere," she said, accessing the enemy vessel's navigation data. "We're going exactly where our friend here was supposed to deliver his next cargo shipment." The implications hit the coalition soldiers like a physical blow. The captured navigation data contained coordinates for dozens of star systems, shipping schedules that coordinated with major galactic trade routes, and communication protocols that suggested an organization far more sophisticated than simple raiders. "This isn't a raiding operation," Quindar said, his crystalline features cycling through colors that indicated shock and realization. "It's a supply chain. Someone is using the Void Hunters to strip mine strategic resources across Coalition space." Sarah nodded grimly. "And they're funding it with stolen quantronium. Every successful raid provides capital for larger operations, better equipment, more sophisticated tactics. We're not dealing with pirates. We're fighting a shadow war against an enemy that's been using our own assumptions against us." The facility's final death throes began as the cascade reaction reached its theoretical maximum. Sarah watched the destruction through sensors that could barely process the scale of energy being released. The mining operation that had taken decades to build was vaporizing in seconds, taking with it evidence of the largest Void Hunter operation ever discovered. "Jump drive ready," Kralex announced. "Coordinates locked in from the prisoner's navigation system." Sarah took one last look at the dying facility, then activated the jump drive. The stolen hauler disappeared into hyperspace just as the quantronium cascade reached total containment failure. Behind them, 50 kilometers of space became briefly brighter than a star. During the hyperspace journey, Sarah interrogated their prisoner through the ship's translation systems. What she learned confirmed her worst fears and validated every tactical instinct that had brought them this far. The Void Hunters weren't an indigenous species. From beyond the galactic rim, they were mercenaries, recruited and equipped by someone with access to Coalition intelligence and military technology. Their raids had been surgical strikes designed to acquire specific resources while maintaining the illusion of random piracy. More troubling, their operations were coordinated with someone inside the Coalition itself. The prisoners' communication logs contained transmission schedules that matched perfectly with Coalition patrol rotations, suggesting intelligence leaks at the highest levels of command. "We're taking this intelligence directly to Coalition command," Kralek said, studying the captured data with obvious concern. This changes everything we thought we knew about the threat. Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on the navigation display. They were approaching the coordinates from the prisoner's ship, a star system that didn't appear on any coalition charts. According to their sensors, they were about to discover the Void Hunter's primary staging area. What they found there would either prove her theories correct or get them all killed in the process. Either way, the rookie they'd dismissed was about to uncover a conspiracy that reached to the very heart of galactic civilization. The jump alarm chimed, signaling their emergence into normal space. Through the viewports, Sarah could see a sight that defied every assumption the Coalition had made about Void Hunter capabilities. They weren't looking at a primitive raider base. They were looking at a military installation that rivaled anything in Coalition space. The Void Hunter stronghold hung in space like a metallic tumor, its twisted architecture defying conventional engineering principles. Massive docking bays could accommodate hundreds of ships, while industrial complexes processed stolen resources on a scale that dwarfed legitimate mining operations. Most disturbing of all, the installation's design incorporated technology that looked distinctly familiar. Those are Coalition sensor arrays, Quindar observed, his crystalline features shifting to deep crimson, rage among his species, and Coalition shield generators. Someone has been providing them with our most advanced military technology. Sarah studied the tactical display with growing unease. The base's defenses were formidable. Automated weapon platforms, patrol squadrons, and energy barriers that could withstand sustained bombardment from a full Coalition battle fleet. But what worried her most were the ships entering and leaving the facility with clockwork precision. "This isn't just a military base," she said quietly. "It's a distribution hub. Look at those cargo vessels. They're heading to different sectors of the galaxy on regular schedules." Sergeant Kralek manipulated the sensor controls with increasing agitation. "I count over 300 ships of various classes. This operation has been running for years, maybe decades. How did Coalition intelligence miss something this massive?" The answer came from their prisoner, who had been listening to their conversation through the ship's translation systems. The Void Hunter's compound eyes reflected what might have been amusement as he spoke in his clicking, chittering language. "He says Coalition intelligence didn't miss it," the translation system reported. "He says Coalition intelligence helped build it." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah felt the same cold certainty she'd experienced during the darkest days of the Martian conflict, when human forces had discovered that their own commanders were selling intelligence to the enemy. Betrayal from within was the one enemy that no amount of tactical skill could overcome. "That's impossible," Kralek said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No Coalition officer would what?" Sarah interrupted. "Sell military secrets for profit? Coordinate with enemies for political advantage? Sacrifice soldiers to protect classified operations?" She gestured toward the massive installation. "Look around, Sergeant. This level of organization requires inside information." Sarah accessed the prisoner's communication logs and began correlating transmission schedules with Coalition intelligence briefings. The pattern that emerged was damning. Every major Void Hunter operation had been preceded by intelligence reports that detailed target vulnerabilities, patrol schedules, and defensive capabilities. "Someone in Coalition command has been feeding them information for years," she concluded. "Every raid, every attack, every surprise encounter has been orchestrated by someone with access to our highest classification levels." Quindar's features cycled through colors that indicated complex emotional processing. "If that's true, then bringing this intelligence to Coalition command could be walking into a trap." Sarah nodded grimly. "Which means we need to gather enough evidence to identify the traitor before we report what we found. And that means getting inside that base." The captured Void Hunter ship provided the perfect infiltration vehicle. Sarah used the prisoner's access codes to request docking clearance, while her teammates studied the base's internal layout through captured intelligence data. The plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. They would dock with the station, gather intelligence on the conspiracy, and escape before their presence was discovered. Of course, no plan survived contact with reality. The docking bay they were assigned to contained a sight that made Sarah's blood run cold. Dozens of ships bearing Coalition markings sat in various stages of modification, their hulls being retrofitted with Void Hunter technology. More damning, Coalition personnel in modified uniforms worked alongside alien engineers, their movements casual and familiar. Coalition traitors, Kralex growled, his forearms instinctively reaching for weapons, working openly with the enemy. Sarah studied the scene through the ship's sensors, noting details that painted an even darker picture. The Coalition personnel weren't prisoners or defectors. They were senior officers, their rank insignia clearly visible even through the modified uniforms. More troubling, their body language suggested they were in command positions rather than subordinate roles. Not traitors, she said quietly. Architects. These people aren't working for the Void Hunters. The Void Hunters are working for them. The implications were staggering. If Sarah was right, the entire Void Hunter threat was a false flag operation designed to justify increased military spending and expanded Coalition authority. The raids weren't attacks on Coalition interests. They were carefully orchestrated, thefts that fed resources back to a shadow organization within the Coalition itself. Docking. Clamps engaged, the station's automated systems announced. Prepare for boarding inspection. Sarah made a decision that went against every protocol she'd ever learned. Instead of trying to avoid detection, she decided to hide in plain sight. Seal your helmets and follow my lead, she ordered. We're about to become the inspection team. Using the prisoners' access codes and authorization protocols, Sarah activated the ship's cargo bay and began transmitting manifests for a fictitious Quantronium delivery. When the station's inspection team arrived, they found 3 Coalition soldiers in modified uniforms conducting a routine cargo verification. The deception worked because it was audacious. The inspection team, consisting of 2 humans and a Catherian, simply assumed that the newcomers were part of the operation. Sarah's military bearing and confident use of proper protocols convinced them that Alpha Squad belonged on the station. New assignments from Sector Command, she explained, presenting forged documentation that her suit's computer had generated using captured communication templates. We're here to review security protocols and report on operational efficiency. The lead inspector, a human female with commander's stripes, nodded approvingly. About time. We've been requesting additional oversight for months. The alien mercenaries are useful, but they lack proper discipline. As they toured the facility, Sarah gathered intelligence that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. The Void Hunter operation was just one component of a massive shadow network that spanned multiple sectors of Coalition space. Legitimate military resources were being diverted to fund illegal operations, while carefully orchestrated attacks provided justification for emergency powers and budget increases. The conspiracy reached to the highest levels of Coalition command, with participants including fleet admirals, intelligence directors, and even members of the governing council. They had created an artificial enemy to justify their own expansion of power, while simultaneously profiting from the resources stolen during false flag operations. The beauty of the system, the inspector explained, as they walked through a facility that processed stolen Quantronium, is that it's self-sustaining. Every raid provides funding for larger operations, while every attack justifies expanded military budgets. We're simultaneously weakening Coalition defenses and strengthening our own position. Sarah nodded as if she understood and approved, while internally calculating how many Coalition soldiers had died to maintain this elaborate deception. The inspector was describing nothing less than a coup in slow motion, a gradual seizure of power disguised as a response to external threats. They reached the facility's command center, where massive displays showed real-time coordination of operations across dozens of star systems. Sarah recognized many of the targets, Coalition facilities that had suffered unexplained attacks over the past year. The pattern was clear. Every raid had been planned and coordinated from this central location. Impressive operation, she commented, studying displays that showed current troop dispositions and upcoming target lists. How long have you been planning the next phase? The inspector smiled with obvious pride. Phase 2 begins next month. Coordinated attacks on 3 core worlds simultaneously, followed by martial law declarations and emergency government protocols. Within 6 months, the old Coalition will be replaced by a more efficient military administration. Sarah felt the cold certainty of someone who had just learned that war was inevitable. The conspiracy wasn't just about theft or profit. It was about replacing the democratic Coalition With an authoritarian regime controlled by military, leaders who saw civilian government as an obstacle to galactic order, she was still processing the implications when alarms began sounding throughout the facility. The inspection team's casual demeanor vanished as they received urgent communications through their personal communicators. Security breach in Docking Bay 7, the lead inspector announced. Unauthorized access to classified intelligence networks. Sarah's blood went cold as she realized what had happened. Their prisoner had escaped and accessed the station's computer systems, probably trying to warn his handlers about the coalition infiltration. Their cover was blown, and they were trapped in the heart of enemy territory with intelligence that could save or doom the entire galaxy. The rookie they'd underestimated was about to face the ultimate test of her abilities. The command center erupted into chaos as security alerts cascaded across the massive displays. Sarah watched coalition officers and Void Hunter commanders coordinate their response with the practiced efficiency of longtime allies, their unified reaction confirming every terrible suspicion she'd harbored about the scope of this conspiracy. Lock down all docking bays, the lead inspector ordered, her friendly demeanor replaced by cold professionalism. Security teams to level 7. No one leaves this station until we identify the infiltrators. Sarah felt Kralex tense beside her, his forearms subtly shifting toward weapon positions. Through their helmet communications, Quindar's voice carried crystalline harmonics of barely controlled panic. They were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, trapped in the heart of enemy territory with intelligence that could save the galaxy, if they lived long enough to deliver it. Commander, Sarah said to the inspector, keeping her voice level and professional, perhaps my team should assist with the security sweep. We have experience with infiltration protocols. The inspector studied her with calculating eyes. Your credentials show recent assignment from Sector 12. That's Crexani territory. Her gaze shifted to Kralex. Yet your team includes a Crexani sergeant. Unusual composition for a Sector 12 unit. Sarah felt the moment balance on a knife's edge. One wrong word would trigger a firefight that would end with their deaths and the conspiracy's survival. But she'd learned something during her years fighting in the Martian colonies. Sometimes the most outrageous lies were the most believable. Sergeant Kralex is on temporary assignment, she said smoothly. Joint Species Integration Initiative. Command wants to evaluate mixed unit effectiveness before implementing broader personnel exchanges. It was exactly the kind of bureaucratic complexity that military organizations generated, and the inspector's expression suggested she found it plausible. But before she could respond, a new voice cut across the command center's noise. Commander Chen. Sarah Chen from Earth Sector? Sarah turned to see a human male approaching with obvious recognition. Her heart sank as she realized that her false identity was about to collide with someone who might know the real Sarah Chen. But when she saw his face, confusion replaced fear. Captain Morrison? She said, using a name from her academy records. I thought you were killed during the Proxima incident. Morrison smiled grimly. Officially, yes. Unofficially, I've been working deep cover to investigate coalition security breaches. His eyes moved meaningfully across the command center. I think we need to talk privately. The inspector looked between them with growing suspicion, but Morrison's rank insignia and confident bearing suggested he had authority in this operation. Use conference room 3, she said finally. But make it quick. We have infiltrators to hunt. As they walked through corridors filled with the evidence of treason, Morrison spoke in low tones that wouldn't carry to surveillance equipment. I've been tracking this conspiracy for 2 years, he said. Started when I noticed correlation patterns between intelligence briefings and Void Hunter attacks. But I never imagined the scope was this large. Sarah studied him carefully, noting details that suggested his story was genuine. Morrison's uniform showed wear patterns consistent with long-term deep cover operations, and his body language carried the paranoid alertness of someone living under constant threat of discovery. How many people know you're alive? She asked. 3, including myself, Morrison replied. And now you. The question is, how did a rookie lieutenant from Earth Sector end up infiltrating the galaxy's most sophisticated shadow operation? Sarah made a decision that went against every instinct for operational security. Because someone labeled me a rookie and assumed I couldn't think beyond basic protocols. She gestured toward Kralex and Quindar. We discovered their mining operation by accident, followed the intelligence here, and walked into the middle of a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of coalition command. Morrison's expression darkened. Then you know about Phase 2. The coordinated attacks on core worlds, the martial law protocols, the complete replacement of civilian government with military administration. We know about it, Sarah confirmed. The question is, what can we do to stop it? Morrison activated a small device that generated a privacy field around their conversation. I've been gathering evidence for months, but I can't transmit it without revealing my position. The conspirators have access to all coalition communication networks. Any message I send will be intercepted before it reaches loyal forces. Sarah's tactical mind began working on the problem with the same methodical approach she'd used to analyze the mining facility. What if we don't use coalition networks? The Void Hunters have their own communication systems, and they're coordinating with multiple sectors simultaneously. She pulled out her modified sensor array and began analyzing the station's communication traffic. The device had been designed for battlefield intelligence gathering, but its sophisticated algorithms could map network architectures and trace signal pathways with remarkable accuracy. There, she said, highlighting a specific transmission pattern. High-priority communications relay directly to 3 different core worlds. If we can access that system and send a simultaneous broadcast to loyal coalition forces, we'd trigger the exposure of the entire conspiracy, Morrison finished. But accessing their communications array would require getting to the station's primary transmitter complex. That's in the highest security section, guarded by both coalition traders and Void Hunter mercenaries. Kralik spoke for the first time since they'd entered the conference room. Human, your species seems to specialize in impossible missions. What's your plan? Sarah studied the station schematics on her tactical display, looking for weaknesses and opportunities that conventional thinking might miss. The transmitter complex was heavily defended, but it was also connected to the station's primary power grid, a system that had vulnerabilities she could exploit. The station's power distribution network includes backup systems for critical operations, she explained. If I can trigger a cascade failure in the primary grid, all defensive systems will automatically switch to backup power. For approximately 3 minutes, the transmitter complex will be operating on reduced power with minimal security coverage. Morrison looked skeptical. 3 minutes isn't enough time to reach the complex, access their systems, and transmit evidence to multiple core worlds. Sarah smiled with the confidence of someone who had learned to think in 3 dimensions. It is if we don't go to the transmitter complex. We bring the transmitter complex to us. She highlighted the station's internal transportation system, a network of cargo tubes and maintenance shafts that connected every section of the facility. The transmitter array includes portable relay units designed for emergency communications. If I can redirect one of those units through the cargo system while the security grid is down, you can access their entire communication network from anywhere on the station, Quindar said, his crystalline features cycling through colors that indicated growing excitement. Brilliant. Insane, but brilliant. The plan required precise timing and more luck than Sarah was comfortable counting on, but it was their only chance to expose the conspiracy before Phase 2 began. Morrison would use his access codes to position them near the cargo system's main hub, while Sarah's team triggered the power cascade and redirected the communication relay. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Morrison gripped Sarah's shoulder with obvious respect. For what it's worth, Lieutenant, I've never seen tactical thinking like yours. Your instructors at the academy would be proud. Sarah nodded, but her mind was already focused on the challenges ahead. In 30 minutes, she would either save the coalition from a carefully orchestrated coup, or die trying to prevent the galaxy's slide into authoritarian rule. The rookie they'd dismissed was about to prove that sometimes the most dangerous enemy wasn't the one with superior firepower, it was the one with superior motivation and the willingness to risk everything for a cause worth dying. For as alarms continued to sound throughout the station, Sarah Chen prepared to show the galaxy exactly what a human soldier could accomplish when the survival of democracy itself hung in the balance. The battlefield had always known her as a legend in the making. Now it was time for the rest of the universe to learn the same lesson.